I'm going to be talking about the power of data to drive social change. And what I mean by that is that I think we can learn a lot about how to best address social issues if we first ask really smart questions about what might be causing them, and then generate good data to answer those questions. So by way of brief background, like they said, I graduated from Amherst back in 2007. And like so many seem to do, I moved to New York to work at an investment bank that was at the time called Lehman Brothers, but it's no longer called Lehman Brothers. And a few years after that, I moved to South Africa to work in HIV prevention. So the organization that I went to work for in South Africa was one that was trying to take the idea of data really seriously. They were trying to be really critical of their own impact. Are we really averting new infections of HIV in adolescent youth? And they were trying to make data-driven decisions about how to improve the effectiveness of their programs. And they weren't alone in that ambition, right? I mean, as you guys well know, there's a push in every sector, but no less the social sector, on behalf of governments and policymakers and research institutions and investors and donors and even NGOs themselves to make better use of data, to try and focus on this concept of impact. But the reality, so back in 2008, 2009, when I got to South Africa to work for this organization, the reality was that their data looked something like this. So there may have been sort of life-saving information in there, but good luck finding it. And at best, their data looked like this: a neon green 50 megabyte Excel file that sat on one person's computer, making it the job of a single person to collect thousands, maybe millions of data points from all over the country, and to spend hours and hours, manually cobbling it together to generate something called organizational learning. And what's been shocking to us and sort of almost every social impact organization that I've met over the last 3 or 4 years, this is their reality. No matter how big they are, no matter how well respected, no matter how well known, and really even if their programs might actually be incredibly effective, the reality is that their, quote, data system looks something like this Excel file. And you can imagine then if they're spending so much time, manually cobbling together data on one person's computer, the reality is that's generating very little, in the way of real-time organizational learning. And so it's not surprising to us then that we meet organizations all the time that can say things, that can make claims like, we reach 50,000 kids. But if you ask them, they're really able to tell you not very much more about who those kids are, what they actually do, what change they created in those kids' lives. But unfortunately, that's sort of the reality, that these organizations right now are being incentivized to make big claims, big, sexy, headline-grabbing claims about impact, and claims that really tell you very little about what they actually do and how effective they are. And we think that's a problem for a number of reasons. First, and this is, I think, more of a personal opinion, these claims make social service work, which, as many of you know, is actually unbelievably difficult and really sort of emotionally wrenching. These claims, I think, make that work seem easier and maybe more effective than it actually is, right? It's easy to think that, 50,000 kids, great, but that's not really what the on-the-ground reality looks and feels like. The second is that just counting up to a big number doesn't really tell you anything, right? It doesn't tell you anything about what the organization actually does and how effectively they do it. And finally, what we found is that when organizations spend so much time just counting up to some big number, they're actually losing opportunities to collect much more useful information. So if we take the example of this organization that was reaching, I think I said 50,000 kids, the real questions might be, who are those 50,000 kids? And how did you reach them? And were you most effective in targeting the most at-risk or in need kids? And what did your program actually do? What change did it create in those kids' lives? And is that consistent across geography and race and sex and age? And maybe if you know the answers to those questions, how is that actually helping you increase or sort of better your process and your delivery? So about 3 years ago, I started a company with two partners that I'd met in South Africa when we worked together on this HIV prevention program. And one of them is actually a fellow Amherst graduate. His name is Taylor Downs of the class of 2008. And we started a company thinking that we could help these organizations both ask and answer these types of questions, these really specific types of questions. And so we think that questions and data go hand in hand. And so we're using technology that's not paper and not this, technology that's more sort of dynamic, user-friendly, accessible. We're trying to give organizations the ability to ask and answer these kinds of questions. So this may surprise you then, but that makes us a technology company that doesn't think that technology is the hard part. The problem isn't that there's no app for that. Realistically, there probably is. The problem is that making effective use of technology requires you to know very specifically what questions you want it to help you answer. So to tell you more about what we do and to sort of illuminate the really powerful things that we've seen happen when organizations combine good questions with good data, I'm going to tell you two stories about two different organizations that we've worked with in Africa. So the first one is an organization called Sanergy. Sanergy is a social enterprise based in Nairobi, Kenya, where I live, that's working to address the crisis of sanitation in urban slums. So today, 1.4 billion people in the world, so that's 1 out of every 7 people on the planet today live in an urban slum. And so if you were one of these people, you might live in a place that looks like this, and you would go to the bathroom in a place that looks like that, or potentially like that. And there was one more picture, but we kept it out for the sake of sort of, to keep this PG-13. So you can imagine that if this many people go to the bathroom in a place like this, with no access to clean water, with no access to a septic system, to a sewage system, to proper waste removal, you can imagine the scale of how big a public health crisis that creates. So Sanergy is working to address this, and here's what they're doing. They've engineered a toilet that's designed specifically for use in the slums. And what they do is they build these toilets and they sell them to entrepreneurs in the slums, so to people that they call toilet operators. And those toilet operators then run the toilet as a business, so they charge people to come and use their toilet. And every day, Sanergy's team collects the waste from every toilet and then converts it into energy and fertilizer that they sell to farms and farmers in Kenya, and they sort of thereby address a food shortage crisis as well. So taken together from front to back, this is an incredibly holistic, incredibly systemic, and really innovative way of addressing this massive public health crisis in urban slums. So you can imagine then that if you're Sanergy and you want to go from where you are today, so that's about 270 toilets in certain very specific slums, to 2 million toilets in urban slums all over the world, you could imagine that there are some very specific questions that you want to be able to answer. Things like, when our sales agents go into the slum every day, how many potential toilet operators are they talking to? Or, if we have a toilet set up, how many people are using it? Right? How much waste are we generating from this toilet? Or maybe, what type of person is the most successful toilet operator? How can we help our operators create more profitable jobs in communities like these? So when we started working with Sanergy about maybe 2.5 years ago, they had these questions, right? They wanted to answer these questions, But the reality is that they were collecting that information on paper forms and Excel spreadsheets, and the answers to those questions were what we like to call dead data. Data that's inaccessible, data that's difficult to analyze, and data that's realistically, it's used increasingly infrequently. So we worked with them. We helped them design a cloud-based application that would sort of collect and analyze some of this information. And today the app uses some really cool smart scanning technology to convert paper forms into digital data. And Sanergy is increasingly experimenting with mobile and SMS-based data collection as well. And so with this new data system, Sanergy is able to sort of start to answer some very specific questions about what they do. Things like, exactly how many kilograms of feces and urine are we collecting from every toilet every day? And it turns out that keeping feces and urine separate is incredibly important for the decomposition process that comes next. And given that that's how much waste we're collecting, what does that tell us about the profitability of our toilet entrepreneurs? How much money are we helping these people to sort of earn as sort of an income stream? So 274 Kenyan shillings is roughly $3 a day. But what's so powerful is that now that Sanergy can answer some questions, they can actually start to ask new ones, increasingly targeted ones. Things like, if this is where our toilets are, in this slum outside of Nairobi, how many people in this area have become Sanergy toilet users? What's driving the psychology of sanitation use? Or what variables drive usage at our toilets? Is it price? Is it location? Is it smell? Is it branding? And who are our most successful toilet entrepreneurs? So one thing Sanergy just recently learned is that toilets operated by women are 25% more profitable than toilets operated by men. And this despite the fact that men in these communities are more likely to be the breadwinners and decision makers. So Sanergy's been able to change their programs. They've actually changed their targeting strategy to go out and target women's groups and women as toilet owners in the slums. And to us, that's an incredibly powerful example of how a really specific question with really specific data come together to make Sanergy and to make organizations like Sanergy more effective in addressing a particular social issue. So one more story about an organization called MyAgro. MyAgro is a social enterprise working with farmers in Mali and Senegal. So these are countries where roughly 80% of the population works in agriculture, and of those people, a really large percentage are subsistence farmers. So these are people who lack access to all kinds of things, access to financial tools, access to seed, access to fertilizer, access to proper farming techniques, access to training in those farming techniques. And because these are people who might live in really remote, disconnected areas, they lack access to markets as well for the crops that they produce. So MyAgro has developed this incredibly innovative model to try and address some of these access issues. And here's how it works. Just like you and I could go to the Walmart on Route 9, and we could pick out a bunch of Christmas presents that we want to buy, but we may not have the money for them today. So we could actually save incrementally. We could deposit money with Walmart over the next 4 or 5 weeks before going to pick up the presents on December 24th. With MyAgro, farmers can save incrementally towards high-quality agricultural inputs using nothing but the mobile phone that they might already own. And it probably wouldn't look like this, but you get the picture. So quick question. Has anyone been to a country where they've had to buy a scratch-off card to top up the airtime on their mobile phone? By way of hand, anyone? Great, so if you have, it might look something like this. And this is how MyAgro's entire sort of model works. So they create these scratch-off cards. Farmers can go to a kiosk in their villages, buy a scratch-off card, SMS in the code that's on that card, and that'll accumulate savings in their account. And then just before the rainy season, MyAgro will actually deliver whatever they've been able to save towards directly to their village, and MyAgro will provide training and support as needed. And so they did this. So MyAgro did this. They created these scratch-off cards. They distributed them in villages across Mali and now in Senegal as well. But all of a sudden, they were being inundated by thousands and thousands of SMSs coming in from farmers who wanted to start using MyAgro to save towards these inputs. And so you can imagine that, like Sanergy, MyAgro had some very specific questions that they wanted to be able to answer, right? Things like, which kiosks in which villages are selling the most vouchers and why? Or which inputs and which crops are farmers most likely to save towards and why? Or are farmers who are in our program, are their yields going up? And are we creating a greater income stream for them? And if so, by how much? But the reality was that with all of these SMSs coming in, MyAgro's office staff was spending so much time just processing this information that they had very little time to actually sort of step back and answer these questions. So we helped them develop an SMS-based application that takes in every SMS from a farmer, validates it, parses it, basically adds up savings held in a farmer's name. We sort of flag or mark off items that the farmer has been able to save towards, and then we create this real-time distribution plan for MyAgro for what inputs and what crops need to be delivered to what village on what day, and to what farmer and what village on what day. And maybe most importantly, we can actually throw up red flags to sort of mark whether a farmer is falling behind on their savings goal. And this is incredibly powerful. So all of a sudden, MyAgro's staff, instead of spending so much time processing this information, they now have access to sort of the answers. They have access to this incredible data set that's going to help them start to answer very specific questions. So some of the things they're now talking about and learning about are things like, what are the financial constraints of smallholder farmers in rural parts of West Africa? And what are the constraints that they face towards savings? Or what flags can we find? What are the characteristics that might make a village or a farmer fall behind on their savings? And what can we do as an organization to go out, find that early enough to go and provide better support? And what can we learn about the different ways that different people save? So most recently, MyAgro has learned that men and women save totally differently. So they've learned that women save in smaller increments in smaller increments more often, whereas men save in bigger increments less often. So MyAgro has actually been able to change how they do their marketing, their outreach, and how they target different demographic groups with their products. And to us, that's again, a really powerful example. We think it's the answer to those types of questions that are going to make MyAgro able to deliver a higher quality product to more people and thereby move more farmers out of poverty. And unfortunately, what we found is that these types of questions, these types of data are not very sexy. They're not getting a lot of attention, despite the fact that we think they're incredibly important. So we think that giving organizations the ability to ask and answer these types of questions, so questions about the lives and constraints of smallholder farmers or the lives and constraints of people living in urban slums, we think that it's ultimately these types of questions that are going to make organizations like MyAgro and like Sanergy more effective. And we think that organizational change is going to come from learnings, that learnings is going to come from data, and that data comes from asking better questions. And so while there's a lot of really cool technology happening here to drive all that data, it's actually asking better questions, that we think is the real innovation. Thanks very much.